Hi, I'm Mike Kelly from Project Healing Waters Omaha. And um, but tonight I'm going to do a deep dive on dry fly wings. Probably not going to tie a complete fly at all. It's just going to go through several different types of dry fly wings. And by no means am I an expert on all of them, but a lot of them I figured out my way that makes it easier for me. If that helps you and makes it easier for you, then that's good. Before we actually get into it, I'm going to just kind of share a picture here. The kind of, as far as trout fishing is concerned, cold water streams, a lot of these live in warm water areas as well. We see a few mayfly species around here, but mostly midges um, as far as aquatic insects and damselflies and stuff. But for dry flies, what we're really focusing on, most of your dry flies that people use for trout are going to be mayflies and caddisflies. In certain parts of the country, especially in the Rocky Mountain West, some of there's some species back east of stonefly, the real ugly one down in the lower right. But you can see by looking at all these insects, they all have a little bit different profile of a wing, a little different shape of a wing. Um, so this is just kind of a depiction of um, how fly tyers over the years have represented these different types of insects. Adult mayfly, that's one of the most vulnerable stages where they're floating on the surface of the water. And it's a lot of fun to fish dry flies. You see a splash. Am I spotlighted for everyone? Um, it's a lot of fun to fish dry flies because you see the take, you see the splash and everything. It's a lot more exciting and it's more visual. Um, and a lot of really old school. This is a Quill Gordon, I believe. A lot of the old school patterns use different types of wings, but it basically gave that upright profile of a wing, and then the hackle, as it's called, represents legs and movement of the wings if they're fluttering. And then, although a mayfly has two split tails, a lot of the tails that we use on our mayfly imitations aren't necessarily to exactly represent that tail, but more to to balance the fly as it floats on the water, and just to give it that, it still gives a representation of a tail or an extended body, but it mostly balances the fly as it sits on the water. Um, Probably the most vulnerable stage of a mayfly's life is called the spinner, and that's basically in short, the egg hatches into a nymph, spends up to even sometimes a couple of years under the surface, and then hatches out into the adult and flies around. Usually within a couple of days, flies around, does its thing, and then comes back to lay eggs on the surface of the water. And then they fall after they're done reproducing. They fall into basically a spent um, dead mayfly floating on the surface of the water, and so that's uh, very easy picking for hungry trout. So a lot of um, your spinner flies, like it's represented just below it, um, just have a wings that go out side to side and represent that flat surface, and then usually a split tail to represent that profile. For caddisflies, probably that's the top. These are the top two flies, insects that trout mostly eat. Um, The adult has like a tent style wing, folds back over its body. And so I think this is a Henryville or Hendrickson. I mix those two up all the time. But it uses a quill wing that's folded back over the body to kind of represent that tent style. And there's several other representations. The hackles help it float on the surface. And again, they also give the representation of legs and movement. And then midges, we don't really bother. Most midges are, by the time they're an adult, are very tiny. And so when fish eat them, they're in clusters like this. And so probably the best dry fly representation of midges is a fly like the Griffith's gnat or a similar fly where it represents a cluster of these midges. So that just kind of gives you a kind of an overview thing. Let me spotlight me. And for the first one, I don't have a sample, but it's a quill slip wing to represent a mayfly. And so there's a lot of challenges. It's one of the most difficult wings to tie. And sadly, it's probably one of the most delicate and fragile wings that you can put on a mayfly. A lot of the older patterns use this type of wing. But basically, when you look at a duck quill, these are the wing quills from a mallard duck. You've got a right and a left wing. So, basically on the bird, these feathers would be, on opposite wings. And if you look at the difference, you've got these long barbules that stick off the side like this. And the other side's very short. And that's for, the wing, for the wind or whatever to, make the bird float. But it's these long sections that are what we use for these types of wings. So in order to get a wing that looks proportional, if you used two separate little sections of this wing, then both of the wings are going to be turning in the same direction and it's not going to look right. And it's also going to probably twist your tippet. So they use opposing, like a right and a left feather from opposite sides of the bird, and use a section of that wing in order to make the wing. So I'm going to switch cameras back again. And so I already have some thread started on the hook, and best way to do this in order to get your wing placement, there's a general rule of thumb, but in a lot of cases it's personal preference. You want that wing on a standard dry fly to be about a quarter. So the hook shank, as we know, is from the back of the eye to where it starts to bend. And you can tell where that is because that's right above the barb. So this is the hook shank. So if you start your thread toward the eye and go to about the midpoint, and this is just a way to keep yourself standardized. Go to about the midpoint right there. And then come back to half of that. That's going to give you about a quarter of the hook shank. And if you come up with a method like that, that'll give you your wing in the same position every time. If you tie a few of these and you just don't like it because your wing's a little bit too far forward, maybe you want to back it off to closer to a third of the hook shank. and not, don't quite go halfway. But for the purpose of this, I'll just start right there. Now I'm going to zoom out some here so you can see what I'm doing with the quills. Now, again, if you look at the colorful side of the feather, which these are gray, but you've got one side that's shiny like that. And you can see this kind of pithy area right here. If you turn it around, it's a dull, solid color. If you put the feathers oriented in the same direction, you can tell right there that that's opposite feathers because the long fibers are on opposite sides of the feather. So now that we've got that, what I want to do, I'm going to put this in a hackle plier so it's easier to show you. The easiest way to get your wing proportions correct is to take, I've got the same size hook, and I'm going to come up to this quill and insert the tip of the hook there and then pull it like that. So that separated that quill in a section that's equal to the gap of the hook. So I'll fold that out and cut it away from the stem. And so there's my one wing. And I'll do the same thing to the other feather. Now, sometimes you have a feather that's a little bit damaged and it doesn't marry. If you look at these barbules that come off of there, they've all got, I don't know if we can see it. If I zoom in, try. If you take one of these, let me take this bottom one off of here. I don't know if you can tell, but there's little fine, thank you. There's little fine hairs on there, and it's like Velcro. And once that's separated, you can kind of work it and get it reconnected, right? But sometimes your feather's a little bit banged up, like up in this section, and you just can't use that. So you're just going to have to trash that. But I'll do the same thing on this feather. Measure with the gap of the hook, strip it up there, and then I've got that section. Then I'll do the same and cut that off.
What size hook are you actually using there?
In this case, I'm using I'm glad you asked that question. In this case, I'm using a size 10 hook, which is a really big dry fly. But I'm doing that so it's easy for you to see. And the reason I said it's a good question is it doesn't matter what size hook you're using. If you use the proportions of the hook, like I went to the halfway point, and then half of that gives me the quarter. I measured my wing slips at a gap of the hook. So if you're using a size 20 hook, it's going to have a very small hook gap, but you're going to have a very small wing. And so the proportions I give you are, they'll apply to any hook size, regardless of, let me zoom out some more here so you see what I'm doing. If you use the hook as your measuring instrument, it doesn't matter what size hook you have, it's always going to be true. So I'm going to take these two slips and I'm going to put the pointed ends together. Be easier for me to do it with the bench to steady my hands here. So I've got those two feathers. You can see that they're splaying apart. It's because they were opposite wings. But I want to get the tips to where they're aligned like that. And now on a dry fly, I want the rounded part of the wing to be in the front. So I'm going to come up here and I want to measure my wing. And again, I'm using the hook as a gauge. I want the a hook shank in length. So I'm holding where I'm holding the base of these against the end of the hook to the eye of the hook. And that gives me my measurement. So now there's two ways of actually mounting this feather. The most common way is when I come up with my thread, I'm pinching it between the feather and my thumb. So now I have it loose. I'm going to come down the other side and on the other side of the hook, and I'm going to have that thread in between my finger and the feathers. So now when I pull straight down, I'm keeping a tight pinch, and I've secured those feathers to the hook shank. So now I'm going to come up and try to make sure that I go behind that and do one more turn. And that should get me pretty firm to the hook. So I'm going to take some tight wraps backwards like this to where I know it's not going to slip on me anymore. And then take these butt ends, and you see how my scissors are at a almost parallel to the hook shank, taking a severe cut to cut those off. I don't want to like a drastic drop off where those were cut. I want a nice tapered body. It's like the natural insect has a slightly tapered body. So when I tie those butt ends down, you can see that tapers right down to the hook shank. So now I can tie my tail in. But let's work on this wing a little bit. So I've got those two. Grab my bodkin and just separate these apart again. So I've got those two wings. I'm going to come up to the base of them right here. I don't want to go like over them because I'll twist those around to the other side. And I just want to fold these up carefully. And then right in front, I want to make several wraps and kind of a little cone shape, like a taper from the eye back against those feathers to stand them up. And then we've got a split wing. This one's come unmarried a little bit, and they'll do that. But if you kind of mess with them a little bit, you can get that Velcro to stick back together. So there's your wings. Tie on your tail, your body material, and then your hackle. And that'll make a nice dry fly wing. Now, any questions on that?
Yes, is the mallard duck feather the only one that works like that?
Any duck feather is very good for you for these types of wings. Of course, as you get into smaller flies, if you're tying down into 18, 20, if you're doing quill wings on a size 20, you're an overachiever. But you can use any feather. But the biggest thing with these wings is, you see how they kind of start to come apart. The first time you get this fly wet, cast it, a couple of false casts, or a fish takes it, that wing is going to be completely shredded. Matter of fact, it's going to kind of look like that. Yeah, I actually broke it, but it slipped out of my fingers is what happened. But this is how a lot of the ones in your fly box are going to look, just kind of shredded like that. It's one of those flies where it gives you a beautiful presentation for one fish, but it's not a very good sturdy wing. And we've got other ones that'll kind of compensate for that. So I'm going to do a different type of wing. I showed you the caddis fly. And with the caddis, well, I told you there was two ways of doing that wing, so I'll do that real quick. Do it one more time using the other method. So I got my quill slip from one wing, doing it off camera just so I can move through these. And I've got that bad section in there, so I'm just going to, this bad section, maybe just for the purpose of this demonstration, I'll go ahead and use that. I don't know how much trouble it will give me, but measure that and cut that piece off. And I'll try to marry those better. I'm kind of slipping, this way and also stroking outwards. And sometimes you can kind of get them to repair. That's not too bad. So the other way to do this, I'm going to line up the tips like I did before. Like I said, I need the table to kind of steady my hands to do that. Okay. And I'll measure the length of the wing against the hook shank. So that's where I want it to be. So I'll transfer that to the thread. And now I'm going to come up and kind of do that same sort of pinch wrap, but I'm going to grab the front and the back, and I'm just going to let this collapse on its own. Now, actually, I'm a little bit towards myself on the top here. I'm kind of leaning in a little bit towards myself because the thread torque is going to want to take that wing. Let me do this again. Thread torque is going to want to take that wing around to the other side. So I'm going to hold it up there, let the thread hang down, and then I'm holding them together, lifting up, and right on top of the hook shank, I'm letting that collapse. Now, just holding it with my finger against it, I'm going to take a wrap behind it, another one behind it. And then I know that's secure enough to cut the butt ends. Do the same thing, cut them at a severe angle. And I've got the same thing, which it did roll a little bit. Then when I stand those up, do a little thread dam in front of it. That stands them up. And they didn't actually roll around, which is what a lot of times the thread torque will do. Eric Austin uses that to perfection. That technique where for wet flies and dry flies, he just lets it collapse on itself. And that's one, he can tie the most beautiful wet flies with married wings and everything. And he uses that technique often. So there's just a couple different ways to doing it. If you want to try them out and decide which one works best for you. Next one we'll do is more of a tent style, like Henryville caddis, Hemingway caddis, just more of a swept back wing. Usually for that type of a fly, I'm going to really throw you a curve here. And I'm going to put just a little bit of dubbing on there. If there's a little bit of a dubbing as a base, I'm just going to kind of go back here and then just lay down a little dubbing there as a base. That's going to kind of give it more, then I'll put my thread on top of that. That's going to give it a little bit to kind of support that wing. Do the same thing, same measurement. Use it. Well, yeah, I'll use it. I'll say I kind of hate to use up the good section of this for throwaways. But y'all are worth it. All right. Same thing with the other wing. Measure it. Sometimes it'll try to go back together there, but you can usually pull that back apart. And then I just kind of fold it back like that and hold it to where I can clip it free from the stem there. Now, with this type of wing, again, there's different ways of doing it. You can do it to where you have your two wings out like this. Dropped it. Spread out like this. Another way to do it actually would be a way to conserve your wing feathers, is to actually lay it over the spot where you're going to tie it in and fold it. And then take a loose wrap over it. And then now we're going forward to make sure it doesn't slip. And then you've got a folded wing over the back. These are actually much easier than the upright wings, I think. I'm actually going to take a little bit less of these to do the one where they're laid off in different directions. Hard to get these just right. Now, the way these are curving, I'm actually going to tie them in this way so that they kind of curve down over the body. And then I'll pinch them, do the same thing, come down on the other side, and then go closer to the hook eye so you don't twist what you did. And there's your split wings, your two wings to lay over the back. So that gives it that tent style wing of a caddisfly. Any questions on that one? Now we'll go with hackle tips. Flies like the Adams, Irresistible. Irresistible is like an Adams with a deer hair, a spun deer hair body. Pretty cool little fly, but it's really a pain to tie it. A mosquito, a spruce dry fly, which I love. Rat face McDougal. That's about all I can think of off the top of my head, but they have hackle. Do I have one? No. They have hackle tip wings where they I'm going to switch over to the materials camera here. I've got a rooster cape here, and all of your feathers that you use for hackle for the front part of the fly are going to be down in this part of it. But as you get toward the back here, wow, there's a cool looking one. You've got a lot of these larger feathers that aren't used as often, but they can be used for a couple different types of wings. So I'm going to take two of these and that have about, equal looking tips. and break them loose from the cape. So got these two, and then I'll switch back over to the other camera. All right, so I'm going to take these two feathers, and just to kind of get them started off, I'll just kind of lay them on top of each other to where the tips are even, and just start stripping some of this stuff off the base. And then just so I have less to work with, I'm just going to cut that off right here. Now I've got some smaller feathers. Now, again, I want this wing to be a hook shank in length. So I'm going to come back now and just start taking all this extra stuff away. Stripping it off. So now I've got my two wings. Try to keep the tips even. And right now they're just a little bit long, but I want to actually use some of that material at the base to kind of help me set these wings. If I was just to try to tie it in by these stems, those things would be rolling in all different directions, and it would just be, I struggled with that for years. But I started, so I'm going to take these two and turn them so that the colorful side is facing out on both of them. Two. And get the tips aligned. Here we are. Okay, tips are aligned. Now I need to actually switch hands here. So measure it again, and then put that over my placement, hanging out over the eye of the hook. And then I'll use that pinch wrap method again to give me a couple of tight wraps there. And then do the same thing back towards the back where I tie that down. Clip out the butts. Come back to the base. And then stand these up. Take some wraps in front. Very similar to what we did with the quill slips. So now those are standing up. And now for this type of wing, though, just so they don't sandwich together all the time, you can kind of separate them a little bit here. And then take some crossing wraps right in between the two. Makes them a little bit more sturdy, and it splays them apart like that. And then you just tie that down and then continue on with your fly. When you do that cross wrap, some of these lower fibers are going to kind of stick out and be obnoxious. But that right there is a pretty nice wing. You can just clip those out of the way, and then when you put your hackle in there, those will be nice wings. Now, these are going to hold up a lot better than the quill slip wings. And there's really only one way to do it, except I might be able to do it with these pieces here. I showed you that picture on the slide there of the spinner. And you can actually, do some cross wraps and get it to where you've got these feathers are actually laying more out 90 degrees to represent those spinner wings. So you can do it more like that. Looks a lot better with a white wing. The wings of a spinner are usually pretty much like transparent. And they're hard to see when you're fishing them. So it's probably better to have a white wing than dark like this. So that's a way to use the hackle tips for either spinner wings or the upright mayfly wings.
Mike, you could also use hen capes. The feather tips on hen capes are very nice too.
Oh, I have that in my sheet, but I didn't say anything about it. You notice those were kind of skinny at the top. If you look at this is a brown hen cape. If you use kind of exaggerated, but if you use a hen hackle, you can see where if you were to strip that back and use that as your wing, it would be a little bit more of a profile like that of a wing. Thank you, Al. And speaking of Al, I think the next one I'm going to try. So let me go ahead and take that hook off of there. Got a few of them sitting here. I'm going to take, remember these where I harvested those tips from? I think these might be long enough. I'm going to use these feathers to create another type of wing. And it's called a Wonder Wing. And I think what I'm going to do, I wish I would have watched Al's video so I could have this fresher in my head, but what I'm going to do is line these two feathers up. Now I want trying to remember how. I want my two wings to be the length of the hook shank again.
Okay,
Now,
now
there it is. There it
Okay.
is. Now I've got my orientation.
there you go.
Okay. So now I want to tie in my thread. Thanks for getting me back on track. You're right. I was starting at the wrong end of the feather and I couldn't remember how the heck I did that.
Mike,
I'll
it
show you a
gets
couple
worse
I
as you
did
get
last
older.
fall. So what we want to do is so these feathers are supposed to be splayed apart. So they have kind of a natural curve. I'm putting it so the two feathers are back to back. And then get them lined up. And I'm going to take more than what I think I'll need. Let's see. And now if I zoom in here, that other light, you see that the bottom has more in it than the top. So I've got those even now. So holding it a little bit towards me, I'm going to tie it in real short here with a couple of kind of medium wraps. And then I'm going to pull that out to where it's the right length. Do that again. Cool. Tie those in short. And then I'll carefully pull them through to where I have the right length. And again, if I want to measure that, I can hold that hook up and measure that that's the right length of the wing. So then I'll just tighten that down. Where that's nice and secure, and I can get rid of those butts. And then while I still have that rest of that feather to use kind of as a handle, I'm going to leave that on there for now. I'm going to fold these up and put a little bit of thread in front of them. So now I've got those two feathers like that. I'm going to go ahead and cut them at the top here. And then split them back apart. And I've got two really cool wings there. So now take a couple cross wraps in between those just to keep them separated like that. And that's a pretty cool wing. You don't actually post these, do you? For just a regular dry fly?
I do not. You don't need to.
But the important thing here is to make sure that the stem isn't tied down here at the base. If I zoom in. I think this light will help. If you look in here, the stem of the feather is actually cut off right here, and it's just the tips that are held there. And the reason that's important is if you were to tie the hackle stems down to the base of the hook there, these would be real stiff. And as you cast this fly through the air, it's going to twist your tippet, especially if you have a narrow tippet. And as long as you have these to where they can move a little bit, that's not so likely to happen. So that's my not prepared Wonder Wing. If you have any questions between me and Al, I'm sure we could help you out with it. I will say, if you look at, if you type into YouTube, Al Beatty, Beatty, you'll find his YouTube channel, and he's got several different videos on Wonder Wings. A lot of people have tied them over the years, and they're not very popular because of the fact that most people tie them in by the stem, and it does cause that problem where the it twists your leader and your tippet, and so it kind of lost favor because of that over the years. But if you tie it incorrectly, then you don't have that problem. A synthetic wing. Parachute flies are pretty popular nowadays. Parachute Adams is probably one of the most used flies that there are. to get a parachute post, probably one of the easiest things to use. You can use all kinds of different materials. You can use hair. You can use calf hair, just about anything actually. You can actually tie Wonder Wings and use those as a parachute post. But poly yarn it's highly visible. It sheds water. It's pretty easy to work with. But this, let's see, I think if I double that, that's probably going to be too much for a size 10 hook, but maybe not. I think what I'm going to do is cut a section of this, about 3-4 inches, and then I'll just split it in half. Okay, now I've got half of that diameter of the stuff that I had. Now, again, there's different ways to do this, but I'm going to start at the front. What I'm going to do is clean up my end here. I'm going to start right behind the eye. Nice tight wraps, and right on top, I'm going to tie that down and go back to my point that I want the wing. Probably closer to 1/3 than 2/3, like right about in there. That's where I want my wing to actually be. It's a trick that Tim Flagler does. You can take the poly yarn there and twist it. And then if you fold it over, let it furl on itself. I'm going to actually do that longer than what I need, exaggerate it. So now my post is actually like probably 1.5 hooks in length. So I'm going to hold that there and wrap toward the back. And then cut it at an angle. So that gives me a smooth taper. Now I'm going to come back to where my wing is. And now that I've twisted that makes it a lot sturdier, and I can just about wrap around the post. Let me twist my thread. Wrap around the. So now you can wrap around the base of that parachute post. That's where your hackle is going to go. And back down. Now the advantage of this is you can go ahead and tie the rest of the fly, and you don't have all that fuzz in your way while you're wrapping the hackle on the hook. And then once you finish the fly, put the tail in, the body, the hackle, then you decide where you want the height you want your wing to be. Just go ahead and cut it. And then you just splay that stuff out, and there's your parachute wing. So the advantage, I don't have a big bump here where I've tied that in, because some of it comes out toward the front and some comes out toward the back. So when that's all cleaned up, you're going to have a nice even body all the way down with that parachute post nice and secure, and it's not going to spin back and forth across the You know, sometimes a parachute post will want to lean over the other way. Now, where are we at in time? 7 o'clock? Do you want to get into deer hair, or did anybody have any questions? For deer hair wings, it depends on the type of fly you're gonna. I'm just gonna real quick. I've got. You can see this is 2 different colors, but it's actually natural deer hair. The stuff that's lighter, it's actually thicker. You can see the hairs are actually thicker. That's from a different part of the deer where the hair is actually more hollow. And if I grab a bunch of it, cut it off. Where's my... I have one, so I'll try to clean it up manually. So if you look in the base of this, you've got shorter fibers and a bunch of fuzz. And if you spread it apart, rough it up, you can get to all of those short fibers and fuzz. And I'm just going to stack this real quick. Put the butts in my stacker, tap it a few times, and then all the butts are even. All the tips are even. So if I want to tie that as, say, a caddis fly, toward the front of the hook here, I'm going to measure my wing. And then if I want those tips to be just past the bend of the hook there, I'm going to measure that like this, and then I'm going to transfer it to this hand. And then I'm actually going to cut it right there. So now, holding this over the eye of the hook, I'm going to come up. If I take my thread, zoom out a little bit, take my thread and spin it counterclockwise as if I'm looking down on it. That makes the thread want to reach back toward my fingers instead of going out the other way. If it was spun the other way, this happens a lot. You're trying to wrap that down and your thread's going off in another direction because it has a twist in it. But if you spin it counterclockwise as if you're looking down on it, the thread wants to reach back toward your fingers. So let's get that set in the right place. So right at the edge of the eye of the hook, I'm going to come up and grab those butts and pull tight. Take another wrap, pull tight, another one. And now by pinching those, I was able to keep them on top of the hook. Now that I spun it, I spun them. But keep it on top of the hook, but it flares out like that. And that's because of that lighter hair is going to really flare. On a caddis fly and some of your stonefly imitations, you want a little bit of flare because you want to give the illusion of flapping wings, flying wings. But on a lot of wings, you want it to be more of a relaxed profile. So on this darker deer hair, I'm going to cut a section of that. And I'm not necessarily going to stack it, but you'll see that the butts of this hair are thicker, they're lighter in color, and out toward the tips, it's real dark. With deer hair, if I was to actually crank down on this stuff, it would flare quite a bit. You can see that. But when you start getting closer to the darker part of the hair, it's going to flare even less. And out here on these tips, if you were to try to flare that, I'll try to wrap it over this way and pull. When I pull that, it'll flare slightly, but not hardly any. So if you want your wing to be laid back like I'm holding it right here, then you're going to want to have some of that darker hair that, you know, if you're harvesting your own, it's that 8-inch stripe along the spine of the deer. That's the hair that's the least amount of hollow spaces in the hair, and it won't flare out as much. Now, if I'm doing a wing back like this, and I kind of flare it, see how it's out like that. If I want to control that, I can take some kind of medium wraps over that. See, and I can kind of bring it into control. So if I do that in reverse, if I'm toward, say, toward the back of the fly and I'm tying in like a tail, and I don't want that tail to flare, I want it to be kind of a, use less here. I want it to be kind of a stiffer tail coming out the back of the fly here. I'm going to take my first couple wraps here as, you know, fairly loose. And then as I get closer toward the front, I'm going to start getting tighter and tighter. Better way to do that, actually, is I'm going to start tying that tail in, measure my tail to length. And then from up in here, I'm going to start tying down with some tight wraps, come back toward the tail and just loosen it up a little bit. I don't want it to twist or anything. And then as I get back this way, I can really crank down on it, and it's not going to affect that at the tail, because the pressure I'm putting is back here and it's not going to flare this. We're not talking about tails, but with wings, it's the same principle. If you're doing a back wing like on this stimulator here, if you don't want that to flare very much, then you just have to be careful on what you do at that thread connection. For something like a comparadun, again, there's different ways of doing it. This stuff would be okay. What you're looking for on, especially when you're getting into smaller dry flies, with this deer hair, I'm going to stick a piece of paper behind it, and you can kind of look at those butt ends. It's kind of hard to tell when you look at it like that what the tips of the deer hair are really doing. But if you look at it like this, you can see the bands are fairly, let me do it here. The color band is fairly even, and the tips aren't real long and black, where on this one, you can see real long black tips and they're all uneven. I don't know if you can see that. You've got the color band of like a light tan color, and then the tips are dark and real fine. If you're going to try to use this on a smaller dry fly, you'd be using this stuff way up toward the tip, and it'd just be black tips mostly. So what you want is something with color right up toward the ends there, and the black tips that are on the end aren't real long. So I'm going to grab a small piece here, and I'm going to clean it out. There's my comb. Use like a mustache comb, and that'll pull out all that under fur. And then again, I'll stack the tips. Now, one way of doing it is to have the tips out toward the front, I'm going to measure my wing. And then I'm going to transfer it over here and actually cut those butts. No, I'm not. I'm not. Measure my wing, put it on that point right there. And then I'm going to take kind of a loose wrap and then a tighter wrap and just pinching that real tight. I'm going to pull it real tight. And now I'm actually going to take those butt ends and cut them loose right there. Now you do have the butt ends there, but that's just going to give you more flotation and kind of a like a thorax profile, like a thicker profile right there. Take your thumb and just kind of give it a press like that to start standing it up. And then I actually like to use dubbing when I dub the body. I'll dub the body and then actually put a little bit of dubbing up here at the front for the head. And then when you have this finished, your compare done wing is going to be kind of spread like this, like a fan shape. It's kind of a bad angle, but you want to spread it out like a fan shape, like that. And then the dubbing will help keep it canted back. A lot of people like to do their comparaduns with a little bit more of a flattened wing. And this is, again, it's supposed to represent a mayfly. And the mayfly wing is a little bit canted back. So if you have it kind of tilted back like that, they say, again, that that's a little less likely to cause a problem with twisting. And a mess here in a second. Here it comes. Good. I'm out of hooks that I had sitting there. So the other way, I always had a little bit of a struggle with is to tie it out over the eye of the hook. Measure it. Let me stack that so it doesn't. Measure my wing. Hold it out over the eye of the hook. Again, I'm pinching those butts really tight so that it doesn't twist around the hook shank and roll around to the outside. I'm taking several wraps back just to hold that in place. And then take that at an angle like that. And then you can tie those butts down. And that'll be your taper of your body. And again, kind of get the thing started by using your thumbnail to press that. A little bit of a thread dam, and then of course, like I said, dubbing in the front, and then you fan it out. And it's that deer hair and then the tails that are going to help float that fly. Any questions on comparadone or selecting the hair? There's other parts of the deer, like the, as I understand it, like hawk hair and stuff like that, that actually has those properties. where you can have the hair that's fine and not have the real long dark tips and everything. I'll just clean this off slightly.